Oh, you didn't see that. I'm a whiskey author expert. I don't drink whiskey on ice. Sorry. Do you ever think that people take whiskey a little too seriously? And I mean, I take whiskey very seriously, but the moment whiskey blends with ice. Now look, when I first started drinking whiskey, I exclusively drank it on ice, especially scotch. I'd buy a bottle of scotch, I'd own that bottle of scotch for 2 or 3 months, I'd drink it down, and I exclusively drank it on ice, and that's how I enjoyed my whiskey. And there's a lot of debate as to what's the best way to drink whiskey, but the reality is a lot of people stop at this stage, and I kind of get it. It's like me with red wines and with beer. I like a dry, fruity red wine. I don't really even know what that means. I just know that's what I order. I like an oaky Chardonnay. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care how it's been matured in this or that, or the fermentation process or the yeast. I care none of that. I know if I go to a restaurant and I order a dry red, I'll be happy. I know if I order a fruity, tangy IPA, I'll be happy. And I think a lot of people are that way about their whiskey, and a lot of people that are that way about their whiskey will be perfectly happy drinking it on ice. And then some of us go a little bit off the deep end. I certainly went off the deep end when it came to scotch, and then American whiskey and Canadian whiskey, and it just exploded from there. And I became very particular about what I drank and how I drank it. But even today, I still drink whiskey on ice. So let's talk about what ice does to whiskey, and maybe it'll surprise you. I don't know. I just don't know what surprises people anymore, but maybe. So I'm drinking Glenlivet 14, finished in a cognac cask, which is a very sweet, as you can tell, sweet, dark whiskey. It's originally been aged in American oak and then later on in cognac barrels. And the type of scotch you drink on ice really determines what you're going to get from it when you drink it on ice. In the old days, especially when I drank scotch, like kind of American oak, so lighter colored scotches, like your Belvinis, for example. So what happens is as the ice melts, it cools the drink. And when you cool the drink, it really tampers the sweetness of the drink. So if you have a really sweet kind of a bourbon, for example, it's going to taste less sweet. It's also being diluted, of course, because there's water, so the alcohol isn't as strong. But with that, you'll get lighter, fruitier notes, and those will pop as you nose the glass. And what I noticed early on when I drank scotch is I'm like, wow, this is getting nicer and nicer and more pleasant. And then eventually the ice melts too far, and then I'm just like, wow, this is just mostly water. And that journey from the moment you pour it onwards is interesting. And I think people that drink it on ice have their own enjoyment of the whiskey because it does change. And that's a fun concept, and it's also very enjoyable. But also there's a reason why a lot of the old school scotches that are mostly American aged, why they do so well on ice, because they're American oak. They're not as sweet. They don't offer as like, this is a cognac finish. It's a sweet scotch. It's got more sugars in it. A drier scotch will give you more of all the zesty notes and floral notes and lemon candied notes as it cools down, and all the sweeter notes get tampered with or hampered. But that's okay because they're not that very sweet. This on ice, I mean, it started off very sweet, but now that it's been a couple of minutes, I'm getting a little more bitter notes. It's getting a little bit more bitter. It's tasting a little more kind of on the Manhattan side of a cocktail than, let's say, something lighter and zestier. And that's okay. In the summertime, a bourbon on ice is perfect. When you're sitting in Kentucky and you've got that humid, hot heat in the summertime, you don't want a sweet drink. You don't want that sweetness. So taking a bourbon and putting it on ice is a terrific idea. I think what people do a lot that is maybe not as helpful is they look at this bottle of scotch and they think it's in its most immaculate condition and we shouldn't change it at all. And I think the answer to that is you're wrong. I mean, the bottle of scotch is irrelevant whether it's this one or another one, but the idea behind the bottle is that you bring it home and you enjoy that whiskey however you'd like it. And I think what I can only share is when you drink it on ice, what's going to happen to that glass. That whiskey is going to be less sweet because you're diluting it. It's going to be less boozy because, again, you're diluting it, and because it's going to be less sweet because you're cooling it down. Then your palate's not going to be able to detect the sugars as much. And the same is true with ice cream, right? Melted ice cream is super, super sweet. Cold ice cream, not as sweet, right? So your palate isn't going to detect as much sweetness as the cooler the drink gets. You're also going to release a lot more floral notes because you're watering down the whiskey, so you're releasing all this extra aroma on it. You're creating a lot of chaos in the glass, and you're enjoying something that's cool and complementary to your palate. I think that's great. So next time somebody says don't drink whiskey on ice, be like, that's fine. However, when I do whiskey tastings, I do generally drink them straight, or neat, as you'd like to say. And the reason for that is I want you to taste the whiskey the way it started out. And then what you do from there is irrelevant. It's to me, it's relevant to you. And so even with this, I'm getting more cinnamon notes, less sweetness on the palate. And certainly I'm not getting any of the zestier notes that I did previously. And by zestier, I mean like kind of like lemon citrus. It's a lot more spicy and punchy, drier on the palate. So this is more dry like a fine wine is dry. Whereas on ice, it was dry, kind of like a Manhattan cocktail is dry. It's just a different level of dry. And a lot of that has to do with just the alcohol content because this is at 40% plus. And watered down, of course, is going to be a little less sweet. But both these drinks are interesting and relevant and fun to drink. I will say, though, the Glenlivet 14 on ice got a little bit too bitter for me. I had those bitter notes start coming out. And without that alcohol and other characters, it just kind of fell flat and neat. It doesn't do that. So really it depends on the drink. And I think that's why certain brands are very popular, is because they do very well on ice. Anyway, I hope that helps. I'm just going to go enjoy this whiskey 2 ways. Cheers.